My aunt took a pair of shears to our family's 150-year-old heirloom quilt, held them up in the afternoon light, and declared my life's work a vulgar stain on our history. Then, in front of everyone, she cut it out. She didn't just cut the fabric. She cut out the heart of me, the part that had spent a year stitching my own story into the threads of my ancestors. Her own daughter, my cousin Brielle, was the one who handed her the scissors. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just watched the piece of me fall to the floor. But that silence was the beginning of a storm they never saw coming. The next time we met, it wasn't me who was ruined. It was the entire legacy she claimed to protect. It all started with a needle and thread, not in a metaphorical sense, but a literal one. In my family, the women didn't pass down jewelry or stock portfolios. We passed down the Chronicle, a sprawling, impossibly intricate quilt started by my great-great-grandmother, Iris, in 1872. It wasn't just a blanket. It was our living history. Each significant family event, a birth, a marriage, a migration, was immortalized in a new panel, stitched by the woman at the heart of that story. It was a tapestry of joy, sorrow, and survival, made of scraps of wedding dresses, baby blankets, and work aprons. The Chronicle was housed in the old sunroom of the family farmhouse, a room I'd converted into my studio, where the scent of old linen, lavender, and beeswax hung in the air. I was the current keeper, a title that sounded ancient and important, but in reality meant I was the one with the skill, the patience, and the reverence to continue the tradition. I loved that quilt more than anything. I'd spent my childhood tracing the faded threads of my ancestors' lives with my fingertips. I knew the story of the silk panel from a dress worn to a presidential ball in the 1920s and the rough homespun cotton patch that commemorated the year the farm almost failed during the Depression. My own mother added a panel of soft pale blue flannel when I was born. It was my job, my honor, to add the next chapter. But I had a gatekeeper. My Aunt Genevieve. Genevieve was my mother's older sister, a woman who wore tradition, like a suit of armor. In her eyes, the past wasn't something to learn from. It was a rigid set of rules to be obeyed without question. She saw herself as the guardian of our family's purity, and she considered my modern interpretations of the craft to be a threat. While I saw quilting as a living, breathing art form, a way to weave the present into the past, she saw it as a museum piece to be perfectly preserved, unchanged. Iris would have used a blind hemstitch here, Elara, she'd say, peering over my shoulder, her voice tight with disapproval. Your tension is expressive. Expressive was her code for wrong. And then there was her daughter, my cousin, Brielle. Brielle was the family's golden child. She was beautiful, married a man with a trust fund, and curated a life on social media that looked like a permanent, high-end catalog photo shoot. She had no interest in the craft, the history, or the work involved. To her, the Chronicle was just a quaint, rustic prop. A backdrop for a charming Instagram post captioned, "Connecting with my heritage. #family, #vintage. Blessed." She treated my life's work, the hours of meticulous design and painstaking stitching, as a cute little hobby. "Oh, Ellie, still playing with your scraps?" she'd ask with a tinkling laugh, tapping at her phone. So adorable. The condescension was a constant low-grade hum in my life, a reminder that my contribution, my art, was seen as less than, because it didn't come with a designer label or a hefty price tag. They were a match set, my aunt and cousin, one protecting a dead version of the past, the other embodying a hollow version of the present. I was stuck in the middle, just trying to stitch them together into something real. The tension wasn't a secret, but it was a quiet war, fought with pursed lips and pointed silences. For years I endured it. The little digs, the backhanded compliments, the subtle acts of exclusion. Like the time a local lifestyle magazine wanted to do a feature on heritage artisans of the valley. Genevieve, as the family's self-appointed spokesperson, arranged the whole thing. She spoke eloquently about Great-Grandma Iris's legacy. She posed with Brielle in front of the quilt, both of them dressed in cream-colored linen, looking like rustic royalty. They didn't mention my name once. When I later asked my aunt why I wasn't included, she'd given me a placid, pitying look. "Oh, honey, we just didn't want to overwhelm you. Your work is so personal, not really for a broad audience." It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, simultaneously dismissing my art and framing it as a favor. The real battleground, however, was my panel. For the last year, I had been working on a piece to commemorate my own story. I wasn't married. I hadn't had a child. My contribution was my art itself. I'd started a small business from my studio, teaching modern quilting techniques and selling my own designs. I was independent, self-sufficient, and deeply proud of the life I had built with my own 2 hands. My panel reflected that. Instead of the traditional muted florals and calicos, I used bold, vibrant colors. I incorporated modern geometric patterns alongside traditional motifs. I even stitched in a single shimmering thread of silver, a nod to the digital world that allowed my small business to thrive. It was a fusion of old and new. It was me. Every few weeks, Genevieve would visit the studio, her presence sucking the warmth from the room. She'd circle my work table like a hawk, her eyes scanning for flaws. "That shade of indigo is rather jarring, isn't it?" she'd murmur. "It doesn't harmonize with the 1940s section." I'd try to explain my vision. "It's meant to stand out, Aunt Genevieve. It represents a new energy, a different time." She would just shake her head slowly. "Tradition isn't about being different, Elara. It's about respect." Brielle's critiques were less articulate but just as sharp. She'd glance at my complex, half-finished panel, a work of hundreds of hours, and say something like, "It's a lot. Have you seen the new collection from Restoration Hardware? Their quilts are so chic, very clean." She once held up her phone to show me a mass-produced, factory-made, gray blanket. "See? Soothing." The implication was clear. My work was chaotic, messy, and unsophisticated. My passion was an embarrassment. The worst part was how they did it in tandem. Genevieve would cut me down with 1,000 tiny snips of tradition, and Brielle would finish the job with the blunt force of her trendy, curated indifference. They were a team, dedicated to making me feel small, out of place in my own home, in my own life, in my own story. But I kept stitching. I thought the work would speak for itself. I thought that once my panel was finished, once it was sewn into its rightful place in the chronicle, they would have to see its value. They would have to see me. I was so incredibly wrong. The day it all shattered was our family's annual Founders' Day gathering. It was a tradition as old as the quilt itself, a day to honor Great-Grandma Iris and share stories. The whole extended family gathered at the farmhouse. The air was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and Genevieve's prize-winning apple pie. It was the day I was set to formally unveil my finished panel and stitch the final seam, attaching it to the Chronicle for good. I was nervous, but also vibrating with a hopeful energy. I'd poured my soul into that square of fabric. It was more than just cloth and thread. It was my declaration of self. I waited until after dessert, when everyone was gathered in the sunroom. The Chronicle was draped over its large custom-made frame, the empty spot waiting for my piece. With trembling hands, I held up my panel. The silver thread caught the afternoon light, and the bold colors seemed to pulse with life against the more subdued, historic sections. I saw a few appreciative nods from my cousins. My dad gave me a proud, encouraging smile. For a moment, I thought, this is it. They'll finally understand. Then Genevieve stood up. She walked over to me, her face a mask of cold disappointment. She didn't look at me. She addressed the room, as if I were a child who had just made a terrible mess. "For 150 years," she began, her voice ringing with theatrical gravity. "This quilt has been a testament to the quiet dignity and enduring strength of the women in this family. It is a symbol of our shared history, of our grace." She paused, then finally turned her eyes to my panel, her lip curling in a faint sneer. "This is not grace. This is a cry for attention. It's loud. It's jarring. It is a vulgar stain on the legacy of Iris Thorne." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I stood frozen, the panel still held in my hands. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Brielle, ever the loyal lieutenant, moved to her mother's side. "Mom's right," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It just doesn't fit. It's like trying too hard." And then it happened. Genevieve turned to the antique sewing box on the mantelpiece, the one that had belonged to Iris herself. She opened it and took out a pair of heavy steel tailor's shears. She walked back towards me, her steps deliberate and loud, on the old wooden floor. "Some things must be protected," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sometimes you have to prune the branch to save the tree." She took the panel from my stunned hands, laid it flat on the floor over the empty spot on the quilt, and before anyone could react, she drove the shears into the heart of my work. The snick of the blades cutting through the layers of fabric, and a year of my life, was the loudest sound I had ever heard. She made 4 quick, precise cuts, slicing out the geometric center I had so painstakingly designed, leaving only the plain border. She stood up, holding the mangled centerpiece between her thumb and forefinger, like it was something soiled. "There," she said, her voice softening, as if she'd just performed a great act of mercy. "The foundation is still good. You can try again, something more appropriate." She turned to her daughter. "Brielle, dear, would you dispose of this?" Brielle took the ruined piece from her mother, walked it to the trash can in the corner, and dropped it in without a second glance. My heart, my story, my art, lying on a bed of used paper napkins and pie crust crumbs. I didn't make a sound. A strange cold calm washed over me. The rage was there, a white-hot nova deep in my chest, but on the surface, I was ice. I looked at my aunt's triumphant face and my cousin's smug indifference. I saw the shock and discomfort on the faces of my other relatives, but no one said a word. No one moved to stop her. In that moment, I understood with blinding clarity that this was never about the quilt. It was about control. It was about erasing any part of the family story she couldn't author herself. Slowly, deliberately, I walked to the trash can. I reached in and pulled out the mangled, beautiful piece of my soul. I then walked over to the sewing box, picked up the shears Genevieve had used, and holding both, my ruined art and the weapon that had destroyed it, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't run. I didn't slam the door. My footsteps were even and steady as I walked through the house, out the front door, and into the fading light. I didn't look back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my studio, the ruined panel laid out on my work table under the lamp, the shears beside it. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a feeling so clear and sharp, it was almost peaceful. It was the clarity of a final straw. I had spent years trying to earn my place at a table where I was never truly welcome, trying to stitch my story into a history that was actively trying to erase me. The old Delara would have grieved. She would have tried to mend the piece, or worse, she would have started over, creating something more appropriate to appease her aunt. She would have swallowed the humiliation and called it keeping the peace. But the woman who walked out of that room was someone new. I looked at the hole in my panel, the violent, empty space where my vision had been. And an idea began to form. It started as a whisper and grew into a roar in the silence of my studio. Genevieve wanted to prune the branch? Fine. I would take that broken branch and plant a whole new forest. I picked up my phone and bought a domain name. The New Legacy Project. I took a high-resolution photo of my ruined panel, the jagged, cut edges stark and brutal. This, I decided, would not be a symbol of my defeat. It would be my founding document, my Declaration of Independence. To understand the sheer calculated cruelty of that act, you have to understand it wasn't the first time Genevieve had tried to prune my life. This was a pattern, a quiet campaign of sabotage that had been going on for over a decade. The truth is, my aunt's obsession with tradition was a convenient cover for her deep-seated terror of being overshadowed, especially by me. Great-Grandma Iris, the woman she claimed to worship, was an innovator. She was a rebel. The early panels of the quilt were full of radical stitching, unconventional materials, and bold narrative choices that broke the rules of her time. She wasn't preserving a tradition. She was inventing one. Genevieve had conveniently edited that part of the story out of her retelling, recasting Iris as a stoic Puritan. The real legacy of the Thorn women wasn't quiet dignity. It was creative courage. A courage I had inherited, and a courage Genevieve despised because she did not possess it. The most painful proof of this came 12 years ago. I was 18, a promising artist with a portfolio that had earned me early acceptance and a partial scholarship to one of the best art and design schools in the country. It was my dream. I was going to study textile design, learn from the masters, and bring that knowledge back to my own work, to the Chronicle. I was ecstatic. My parents were thrilled for me. Genevieve, however, was not. She put on a show of polite support, but underneath, I could feel her cold disapproval. "It's so far away," she'd say with a worried frown. "And those big city art schools, they can be very corrupting. They'll try to change you." The final portfolio had to be submitted by mail, a large, flat-packed collection of my best original work. The deadline was April 1st. I finished it in mid-March, triple-checked everything, and left the package with my aunt, who was driving into the city that day and had insisted actually, on dropping it at the post office for me. "Let me help, dear," she had said, her voice like warm honey. "You've worked so hard. You relax. I'll make sure it gets there with time to spare." I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my aunt. Weeks went by. I never received the confirmation of receipt from the school. When I called their admissions office in a panic in late April, they were polite, but firm. My portfolio had never arrived. The deadline had passed. My spot and my scholarship were gone. I was devastated, inconsolable. When I confronted Genevieve, she put on a theatrical display of horror and confusion. "Oh, my heavens! I don't understand. I dropped it off myself. That terrible postal service. You can't trust them with anything important." She helped me file complaints. She made calls. She played the part of the concerned, helpful aunt perfectly. There was no proof of anything sinister. I was just another victim of a lost package. I lost my dream, and instead, I enrolled in the local community college, staying close to home, close to the family, close to her. It wasn't until years later, during a big clear-out of the farmhouse attic, that I found it. Tucked away in the back of an old cedar chest, beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets, was my portfolio. It had never been mailed. It was still sealed with the tape I had used. The discovery didn't feel like a vindication. It just felt heavy. It recontextualized every single interaction we'd had since, every backhanded compliment, every piece of well-meaning advice, every little act of sabotage. It was all part of her grand design, to keep me here, to keep me small, to keep me under her control. She hadn't just misplaced my future. She had stolen it and hidden it in the attic, all under the guise of protecting me. And the cruelest irony? The family trust that was supposed to help pay for my education? Genevieve was the executor. With my failure to get into the prestigious art school, she'd argued successfully to the family elders that the funds should be preserved for more stable family investments, like funding Brielle's endlessly redecorated guest room. So when she took those shears to my quilt panel, she wasn't just cutting fabric. She was repeating the core act of her life, trying to cut away my future to preserve her own fragile sense of importance. But this time, I wasn't an 18-year-old girl anymore, and this time, I had the shears. The new legacy project launched not with a party, but with a single defiant post online. It was the photo of my ruined panel. Beneath it, I wrote its story. I didn't mention my aunt's name. I didn't have to. I just told the truth. This was a piece of a 150-year-old story. It was cut out because it was told in a new voice. But legacy isn't about silencing new voices. It's about making room for them to sing. This broken piece will be the first block in a new quilt. A quilt for all of us who have ever been told we don't fit. I'm calling it The People's Chronicle. Every story is welcome here. I posted it and went to bed, my heart pounding. When I woke up, something incredible had happened. My post had been shared, and shared again. Dozens of times, then hundreds. My inbox was flooded, not just with messages of sympathy, but with stories. A woman from Ohio wrote about how her mother-in-law refused to use her grandchild's chosen pronouns. A young man from Oregon shared how his father had called his passion for baking unmanly and a waste of time. A woman from my own town told me about being shamed by her family for getting a divorce. Story after story, pouring in from people who had also been cut out. They were all sending me their own scraps, digital photos of objects that represented their rejected selves. A worn-out pair of dance shoes, a dog-eared poetry book, a rejected business plan. Suddenly, my personal violation had become a public cause. I announced my first workshop, Mending the Narrative. It wasn't about quilting in the traditional sense. It was a space for people to come together and tell the stories they'd been forced to silence. We wouldn't be stitching fabric. We'd be stitching our histories back together. I held it in my studio, the old sunroom. I expected maybe 5 or 6 people. 30 showed up. They crammed into the small space, sitting on the floor, on stools, leaning against the walls. We talked for hours. We cried. We laughed. We listened. At the end, I laid out a large blank canvas of muslin on the floor. "This is the first panel of the People's Chronicle," I said. "What do we want it to say?" The project took on a life of its own. It became a weekly gathering. The local news picked up the story. An art blogger wrote a feature on us. People started donating fabric, thread, money. My little studio became a vibrant, bustling hub of creation. We were making something powerful and new, a tapestry woven from the threads of resilience. I was so immersed in this new world that I barely noticed the silence from the farmhouse. There were no calls, no texts, no passive-aggressive emails. It was a cold, unnerving quiet. I knew it couldn't last. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon, right in the middle of a workshop. The studio was full, buzzing with the happy chaos of about 24 people working on a new collective panel. The door swung open, and there stood Genevieve and Brielle. The chatter in the room died instantly. They stood framed in the doorway, 2 ghosts from a past I was actively trying to rewrite. Genevieve's face was pale with fury, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. Brielle looked deeply uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the room at the commoners who had invaded her sacred family space. "Elara," Genevieve said, her voice dangerously low. "I need to speak with you. Alone." I placed the needle I was holding carefully into a pincushion. "I'm a little busy, Aunt Genevieve, and these are my friends. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." Her eyes narrowed. "This is a private family matter." "It stopped being a private family matter when you used family shares to destroy my work in front of an audience," I replied, my voice even and calm. A few people in the room shifted, murmuring in support. This emboldened her rage. "How dare you!" she hissed, taking a step into the room. "You have taken our family's most precious legacy and turned it into this circus. You are airing our laundry for the whole world to see. You are tarnishing the name of Iris Thorne." Brielle chimed in, finding her footing. "It's so tacky, Elara. You're commercializing our heritage. Did you really have to start a GoFundMe? It's embarrassing." I finally stood up, facing them directly. The old me would have shrunk. The new me felt 10 feet tall. "Embarrassing?" I repeated, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I had. "Let me tell you what's embarrassing. Embarrassing is twisting the story of a brave, innovative woman like Iris Thorne into a weapon to keep other women small. Embarrassing is claiming to be the guardian of a legacy you don't even understand." Iris wasn't about quiet dignity. She was about loud courage. She used a scrap from a soldier's uniform after the Civil War. She used a piece of a political banner from a suffragette march. Her work was political. It was personal. It was new. You haven't been protecting her legacy, Aunt Genevieve. You've been holding it hostage. I turned my gaze to Brielle, who flinched. "And you? You talk about tacky? You who use that quilt as a prop for your hollow, curated life? You think legacy is something you can pose with? Something you inherit without effort? You are the very definition of style over substance." I took a deep breath. "This," I said, gesturing to the room full of people, to the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful work we were creating. "This is legacy. It's alive. It's growing. It's inclusive. It's everything you are terrified of. You didn't just cut a piece out of that quilt. You severed a connection. And I'm not the one who's bleeding." Genevieve was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her entire worldview had been dismantled in front of an audience. Brielle just stared at me. A flicker of something. Maybe shock. Maybe even a sliver of grudging respect. In her eyes, before it was quickly extinguished. "You have made a terrible mistake, Elara," Genevieve finally managed to say, her voice trembling with impotent rage. "You have chosen these strangers over your own family." "No," I said, my voice softening now, not with pity, but with a final resolute sadness. "You made that choice for me a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting it." I turned my back on them and addressed the room. "All right, everyone. Who needs help with their feather stitch?" The chatter started up again, hesitant at first, and then joyful. The work continued. After a moment, I heard the door click shut behind me. The ghosts were gone. The fallout was exactly what you'd expect. The family split, not neatly down the middle, but like a piece of shattered glass. Some of the older relatives, the ones who orbited Genevieve, sided with her. They sent me stern, disappointed messages about loyalty and respecting my elders. But many of the others, my cousins, my younger aunts and uncles, even my own parents who had been too shocked to speak in the moment, rallied around me. They showed up at my workshops. They brought food. They brought fabric. My dad, a quiet man who rarely interfered in family drama, came to my studio one afternoon, looked at the thriving community I had built, and said with tears in his eyes, "Iris would have loved this. This is what she was all about." That meant more to me than 1,000 apologies from Genevieve. The new legacy project flourished in a way I never could have dreamed. We got a grant from the State Arts Council. We moved into a larger space in town. The People's Chronicle grew into a massive, breathtaking tapestry, a testament to hundreds of stories of resilience. It was invited to be exhibited at a regional art museum. My vulgar stain had become a celebrated work of public art. And what of the original chronicle? It sits in the sunroom of the empty farmhouse. Genevieve still lives there, but fewer and fewer people visit. The house that was once the vibrant heart of the family is now just a quiet, lonely museum of her own making. The quilt hangs on its frame, beautiful but broken, with a stark, empty square in the middle. A permanent monument to what she lost, a story with a hole in it. The most telling consequence, however, happened to Brielle. About a year after our confrontation, the cracks in her perfect, curated life began to show. Word got out that her husband's family, old money who valued substance and discretion, were deeply unimpressed by her vapid influencer lifestyle. Her businesses, a series of failed subscription boxes and affiliate marketing schemes, were built on a mountain of debt. The trust fund she'd married into was apparently not bottomless, and it certainly wasn't for her. The last I heard, they were separated, and she was trying to rebrand herself as a life coach. Her style had no substance to back it up, and eventually, everyone saw through it. It turned out that when your entire identity is a prop, it can be taken away from you just as easily. Sometimes, late at night, when my studio is quiet, I look at the high-resolution photo of my original, ruined panel that I keep on my wall. I wonder if I went too far. Was it petty to build a rival legacy? Was it cruel to expose them so publicly? Or was it the only way to heal? To take the instrument of your own wound and use it to build something beautiful isn't an act of revenge. It's an act of survival. It's the ultimate act of creation. Legacy isn't a thing you inherit in a will, like a silver teapot or a piece of land. It's not a static object to be kept under glass, polished and revered, but never touched. True legacy is a conversation between the past and the future. It's a garden, not a museum. You have to be willing to pull the weeds, to till the soil. And sometimes you have to have the courage to plant something entirely new. You can't let people who are terrified of change convince you to live in a black and white photograph when you are meant to paint in brilliant, vibrant color. Your story is yours to write, and you should never, ever hand the pen, or the shears, to someone who would rather see a blank page than a chapter they didn't get to control. So what do you think? Did I do the right thing, or did I just destroy my own family over a piece of fabric? Have you ever had to break with a tradition in order to save yourself? I genuinely want to know what you would have done in my shoes. Let me know down in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what we build together next.